So I talked a bit in the previous video about how the ego or the self seems to be seeking its own death or demise in some form, and how when faced with an end it behaved in a very different way. So it was seeking its own cessation because it wasn't able to, the self wasn't able to understand or comprehend from its point of view non-existence, as in it was attaching some sort of meaning to the experience of cessation. When deconstructing the more deeply rooted parts of the self and the ego and its attachment to the human experience in the physical body, the ego, it comes up strongly. It's quite visceral, it's in the body, and it creates a lot of pain for itself. The ego and the self has to have meaning for things. It seems that it attaches meaning to everything. It can't function without meaning. So when the meaning isn't there, it panics, I think. So the meaning and the choice and the illusion of free will, I suppose, and choice seems to be a function of the self, a function of the ego. Whereas the choice is essentially somewhat of an illusion. It seems to attach meaning to the idea of waking up and the idea of the thought-based idea of the insight into no self or non-duality. I think I'm going through some sort of transitional period where the shift in perspective is creating this separation resistance, where I suppose this has to be coming from the self and the ego, because from the perspective of non-duality, none of this matters. Essentially, that's a constant that's always there, and the mattering only seems to be a function of the person and the ego. Before, it felt very simple. It felt very simple from the perspective of the self. For some reason, I think the function of deconstructing the certain layers of the self and certain thought forms and letting them go was quite easy and seemed very simple and normal, but the deeper layers and the deeper attachments, the function of so the maintaining of that perspective seems to be very frightening for the ego. So it comes in I say this all the time, it comes in waves. So the thought forms come up and the emotions attached, and the visceral experience of the body comes up, and then I just keep looking at it, sitting into the presence and creating that empty space which is already there anyway. And then it comes back up again. So it's like I'm gradually taking the self to pieces and analysing all the different layers. And in doing that, it's releasing some energy, and that's what I'm feeling. With the strong thought forms and the death anxiety and so on. I'm finding it very difficult to explain this, because when I'm explaining this, it's from the point of view of the person, of the self, of the ego. Pretty much everything is coming from that point of view. It's impossible to explain the space of no self or the space of non-duality, and it gets very confusing when the mind tries to analyse it, or I try and put it into words. But what I'm trying to say is holding that space is becoming much more challenging, I guess, from the point of view of the person, from the point of view of the ego. It does what it wants, and it comes up quite frequently, actually, with stronger thought forms than I was experiencing before. And it's almost like it's coming up and it's offering you this invite to analyse things, and it's offering you an invite to engage with it, and it changes a bit every time. It changes its approach every time when it comes up in the wave and then subsides. Like it's trying to perform for you, in a sense. But from the perspective of the person, it seems like there is choice, and it seems like there is meaning. And I guess the prospect of meaninglessness and the prospect of loss of control and loss of the physical body as well, all that comes up to be looked at from the point of view of emptiness and no self and non-duality, or whatever you want to call it. It's just a happening. I don't know how to describe it. It's just happening. Everything's just happening as it is. It's just the universe expressing itself, and the self and the person is part of that expression. It's all part of it. The stillness pervades everything. it's the consciousness that's identified with this form. But the waking up from that identification with the form seems to be releasing emotional and thought form energy as that space deepens. That's the best way I can describe it. Like I keep saying, it's very difficult to describe this. But like I say, everything that I do describe tends to be from the perspective of the self, from the person, from the ego. But that self and that ego is just consciousness expressing itself and then talking to itself, talking itself through the process of disidentification from the form. But the advice of the spiritual teachers that I have talked to and follow say just sit with it, just exactly what I've been doing before. It's just all this complexity is coming out and it's rising and it's passing. And that's just the function of the process of waking up. Just stay with the presence, stay with the emptiness and deepen it. Just keep deepening it, keep sitting in it as much as possible. So I find it interesting because it was quite easy before, and that's why I ended up on a sort of spiritual high for a while. Because when you see it, when you get that insight for yourself, it ceases to be a mental concept and it becomes real, if that's the word that you can use, and you know it's that the path is real, if that makes sense. You know it's not just bullshit what the spiritual teachers talk about, and I've been talking about this one thing, all of them, for so many thousands of years. I believed that before, but I didn't know it. And then knowing that to begin with creates a spiritual high, which leads to the conscious deconstruction of the self and the ego. And that process is carrying itself out just now, and still quite painful.